The Galactic Council did not announce the betrayal with rage. It did not arrive with war drums warnings or the screaming urgency of conflict. It arrived like paperwork being signed. Across every human system connected to interstellar law, old diplomatic relays, forgotten colonial outposts, even civilian archive feeds that hadn't been touched in years, something quietly changed. Files updated themselves without permission. Titles shifted. Status fields flickered once, then settled into a single impossible designation: Earth, removed from Council jurisdiction. At first, humanity didn't understand what it meant. Not truly. On Luna's fractured communication arrays, technicians stared at scrolling data streams that refused to explain themselves. On Mars, embassy officers demanded clarification from channels that no longer responded. In orbit above Jupiter's industrial belts, trade captains found their access codes rejected by systems that had recognized them for decades. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was worse. It was administrative erasure at a scale so vast it felt unreal. And then came the message, not through a single channel but through all of them at once, embedded in the backbone of interstellar communication like a truth forced into existence. It bypassed encryption. It ignored security protocols. It spoke in every language simultaneously, yet felt like it was not meant for any of them. Earth has been removed from Council consideration. Compliance is no longer required. No signature followed. No origin point. No traceable sender. The message simply was, as if the galaxy itself had decided to speak and chosen Earth as the subject of its sentence. On Earth, night-side cities flickered as global networks briefly synchronized to display the same impossible words. Skies filled with quiet satellite interference patterns that looked almost like static, almost like hesitation. In the underground command structures beneath the Pacific Trench, senior officers reviewed the message in silence that grew heavier with every passing second, not because they didn't understand the words, but because they understood them too well. Removed did not mean ignored. Removed meant unaccounted for. Unaccounted things could be rewritten. In the outer colonies, ships attempting routine Council authorization suddenly found themselves drifting without legal navigation permissions. As if the universe itself had stopped recognizing their right to travel, some crews tried to reroute manually. Others attempted contact. Most received nothing at all. Just silence. And beneath that silence, something colder. The realization that every agreement, every treaty, every diplomatic structure humanity had built its place upon had been quietly invalidated in a single administrative act. No trial, no debate, no resistance recorded. In the deep observation chambers of Earth's lunar command, Commander Eris Vale stood alone before a wall of failing interstellar feeds. His reflection fractured across the glass as distant star systems blinked out of authorized access one by one. Not destroyed, not lost, simply marked unavailable. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. This wasn't collapse through force. This was removal from reality's official record. Behind him, analysts waited for instructions that would not come quickly enough. Somewhere far beyond Earth's orbit, ships that once called themselves allies were already receiving updated directives from a council that no longer included humanity in its definitions. Eris finally spoke, voice low enough that it barely disturbed the air. "So," he said, eyes fixed on the erased sectors of the galaxy, "they didn't declare war." A pause, a breath that felt heavier than space itself. They deleted us instead. And somewhere deep in the silence that followed, Earth began to understand what it meant to be told it no longer existed on paper written by the stars. Earth did not collapse when the message arrived. It adjusted. Deep beneath the fractured remains of Lunar Station K7, where once proud observation towers now floated like broken teeth in silent orbit, Commander Eris Vale stood inside what remained of humanity's last unified command architecture. It was not a capital, not a throne room, not even a true military center anymore. It was what survived after everything else had been reassigned, repurposed, or quietly deauthorized by the Galactic Council's expanding influence. The chamber itself was carved into the moon's basalt skeleton. Layers of hardened tunnels reinforced over centuries with scavenged alloy and forgotten alien materials humanity had never officially been given access to. Lights pulsed softly along the curved walls, reacting not to commands but to presence. The air carried a faint metallic dryness, recycled too many times through systems that had long since stopped expecting replacement parts. Around Eris, the remnant fleet existed only as projections, ghost frames of ships hidden across the solar system, stitched together through encrypted channels that no longer belonged to any official network. There were no grand banners here, no ceremonial ranks, only scattered survivors of a civilization that had learned too late how easily membership in the galaxy could be revoked. And yet, they were still here. Eris watched the holographic star map suspended in front of him. It flickered constantly like it was struggling to maintain permission to exist. Entire sectors of human space dimmed and relit in unstable cycles, as if reality itself was unsure whether to acknowledge them. Mars blinked out for half a second, then returned. Europa's relay chain fractured into fragmented nodes, then stabilized. Each fluctuation carried the same underlying truth. The galaxy was not attacking Earth, it was reclassifying it. A technician nearby swallowed hard, breaking the silence. "Council channels are still locked," she said, voice tight with exhaustion. No direct response routes, no appeal pathways. It's like every diplomatic layer has been peeled away. Another voice, younger, sharper, cut in from across the chamber. "We're still listed in the auxiliary trade grids, though." That means nothing," Eris interrupted quietly. Not harsh, just final, because he had already seen the pattern forming. The Galactic Council did not destroy civilizations directly when it no longer needed to. That was primitive, inefficient, messy. Instead, it removed their relevance. First communication rights, then legal standing, then historical acknowledgement, until eventually nothing remained but physical presence without institutional existence. A species could survive that, but only briefly. On the edge of the holographic map, human colony signatures flickered again, this time with new labels assigned by Council automation systems. Not occupied, not independent, not even non-compliant, just unassigned entities. Eris felt something tighten in his chest, though his expression did not change. He had spent years studying Council behavior patterns, long before humanity believed it would ever matter. He knew what came after reassignment: disconnection, isolation, dissolution through neglect, not war, erasure by silence. The command chamber's ambient hum shifted suddenly, and every screen in the room synchronized to a single incoming transmission feed, unrequested, unverified, and untraceable. The message repeated itself across every display, every terminal, every personal interface linked to human systems. Earth has been removed from Council jurisdiction. Compliance is no longer required. For a moment, no one spoke. Not because they didn't understand, but because understanding it felt physically wrong. A junior analyst finally whispered the thought no one wanted to shape into words. "If we're not under jurisdiction, what are we?" No one answered. Eris kept his eyes on the failing map of human space. The galaxy outside had not fired a single shot. No fleets had crossed borders in aggression. No planets had burned. And yet Earth was already bleeding, through systems, through law, through recognition itself. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost beneath the machinery. "They didn't remove us from the Council," he said at last. A pause. "They removed the Council from needing to consider us at all." And in that quiet realization, the remnant fleet understood something far more dangerous than invasion. They were no longer being fought. They were being edited out. The rising tension did not begin with weapons. It began with absence. At first it was almost polite. Humanity's outer colonies stopped receiving Council transit confirmations, not denied, simply left unanswered like messages dropped into a void that had decided not to reply. Ships approaching Council-controlled corridors found their navigation permissions quietly expiring mid-flight, their trajectories flattening into inert drift as if the galaxy itself had stopped acknowledging their intent to travel. Then came the economic fractures. Trade lanes that had functioned for centuries, arteries of interstellar exchange, began to recalculate. Routes re-rendered without Earth as a destination node. Supply chains rerouted around human space as if it had become an unlisted region. Entire industries dependent on off-world imports froze overnight, not because they were cut off, but because they had been reclassified as optional. And still, no one declared hostility. That was the strangest part. Inside Lunar Command K7, Eris Vale watched the slow strangulation of human connectivity spread across the holographic map like a living algorithm. Each sector that dimmed did not explode or collapse. It simply faded from authorized interaction, one layer at a time, as if being gently erased from a shared document no one remembered creating. A junior systems officer leaned over a diagnostic console, eyes bloodshot from continuous monitoring. "It's not a blockade," she said quietly. "Blockades have edges." This is just non-recognition. No one corrected her, because she was right. Across deep space, human diplomatic vessels attempting routine council contact found their authentication keys rejected without error codes. No alarms, no hostile flags. Just a single consistent response repeated across every interface. Access not required. The phrase spread through human command networks like a virus of implication. Not denied, not restricted, not required. In orbit above Mars, a convoy of humanitarian ships carrying medical aid to a struggling colony simply stopped receiving gravitational docking permissions. They weren't fired upon. They weren't intercepted. They were rendered procedurally irrelevant to the systems they had once been integrated into. And the psychological pressure began to build, because war has rules. Even betrayal has structure. But this was neither. It was administrative silence applied at galactic scale. In the command vault beneath the moon, Eris stood motionless as new updates flickered across the central display. Human colonies, once clearly labeled as member territories, were being reassigned subtle classification tags by automated council systems. Not enemy, not threat, not even neutral, just non-referenced entities. A technician behind him finally broke. "They're removing us from lookup tables," he said, voice shaking despite his effort to steady it. "If we're not indexed, we can't be contacted. If we can't be contacted..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eris understood the implication too well. A civilization that cannot be referenced does not need to be destroyed. It simply becomes untrackable in history. Outside the command chamber, Earth's orbital defenses remained intact, but irrelevant. Their targeting systems still functioned. Their weapons still charged. But there were fewer and fewer targets left to lock onto, as council systems quietly stopped acknowledging human presence as a valid category for interaction. And through it all, the Galactic Council remained silent in the only way that mattered. Not through refusal, but through non-response at every level of existence that counted. Eris finally spoke, not to the room but to the realization settling over all of them like gravity increasing by degrees. "They're not cutting us off," he said. A pause. "They're deciding we were never connected at all." And somewhere in the growing silence between stars, humanity began to understand the true shape of what was happening. Not war. Not exile. But erasure through irrelevance, so complete that even resistance might never be recorded as having existed. The twist did not arrive with a fleet. It arrived with a glitch in reality's paperwork. It began deep inside the Council's own archival lattice, a system older than most civilizations, built to preserve the legal and historical continuity of the galaxy. Every species, every treaty, every act of war or peace was stored there not as memory but as official existence. To be absent from that archive was not ignorance. It was non-being. And for the first time in recorded history, Earth's entire historical signature began to fragment inside it. At first, Council archivists assumed corruption, data decay, a cascading error in one of the subspace redundancy cores. But when they initiated recovery protocols, the system responded with something far more unsettling than failure. It returned inconsistent histories. One record showed Earth as a junior member species recently admitted still under observation. Another showed Earth as never having been formally inducted at all. A third, flagged as high confidence, listed Earth as an unresolved classification anomaly predating Council formation itself. 3 truths, all equally validated by internal verification systems, none of them compatible with the others. Inside the Central Council data chamber, analysts stood frozen in shifting blue-white light as the archival sphere above them flickered like a dying star. Entire timelines attempted to stabilize, then collapsed the moment observation focused too sharply. The more they tried to define Earth, the more the system produced variations, like reality itself was refusing to settle on a single agreed version of humanity. A senior archivist finally spoke, voice trembling despite decades of institutional discipline. "We're not looking at corruption," she said. "We're looking at instability in historical consensus." No one corrected her, because every instrument agreed, and that was worse. Far beyond the Council core, in command ships and monitoring stations scattered across Allied fleets, the same phenomenon began appearing. Tactical databases that once held precise records of Earth's military capacity now displayed contradictory entries that updated in real time. One fleet's logs listed human strength as negligible. Another flagged them as strategically unpredictable. A third refused to assign any classification at all, not because it lacked data, but because the data refused to converge into a single truth. And then came the moment everything broke. A council historian attempted a full reconstructive audit of Earth's succession records. The system complied instantly. Streams of archival data poured into the projection chamber, cascading through centuries of diplomatic history, treaty negotiations, recorded votes, then stopped, mid-sentence, mid-event, as if something had reached into the archive and edited continuity itself. The projection flickered violently. Entire chapters of galactic history reshuffled. Wars that once included Earth now showed different outcomes. Alliances shifted without explanation. Entire diplomatic summits appeared with Earth both present and absent in the same recorded moment. Inside the chamber, the archivist began to back away from the sphere. Not because it was dangerous, but because it no longer behaved like a record of reality. It behaved like a negotiation, a living argument between versions of history that could not agree on whether Earth had ever been allowed to exist within the Council's framework in the first place. And then the final update arrived, a single line embedded across every Council archival node simultaneously. Status: Earth, unresolved authority node. The room fell silent. Because unresolved was not a classification, it was a failure state. It meant the system could not determine which version of reality was correct, while all versions continued to exist at once. And somewhere deep in the Council hierarchy, someone finally whispered the question no one was prepared to ask. If we can't agree on what Earth is, a pause, then what exactly have we been interacting with this entire time? And in that moment, the Galactic Council realized the betrayal was not external. It was informational. Because Earth had not been removed from history. History itself had begun refusing to define Earth consistently enough to control. The climax did not begin with a command. It began with humanity choosing to stop asking permission. Deep beneath the fractured orbit of Luna, Commander Eris Vale stood before a command architecture that no longer looked like a control center. It looked like a threshold. The holographic chamber around him had shifted again, systems no longer displaying fleet positions or council classifications, but something far more unsettling: patterns. Not maps, not tactics, not war plans. Patterns of decision itself, how civilizations reacted when pushed into contradiction. How empires collapsed not from force but from confusion. How authority dissolved when its definitions stopped agreeing with reality. And now, every pattern pointed back to one conclusion. The Council was not simply wrong about Earth. It was incapable of correctly defining it under pressure. Final status update. A voice requested from the surrounding systems, calm, artificial, no longer fully human in tone. The remnant fleet had long since merged its command logic with adaptive intelligence frameworks that learned faster than any doctrine could be written. Eris did not answer immediately. Outside Luna, beyond the shattered remnants of orbital infrastructure, the galaxy's fleet still hovered at the edge of human space. Not attacking, not advancing, waiting. Because even they could feel it now, the instability that had spread through every attempt to classify Earth. Every strike plan failed before execution. Every diplomatic channel collapsed into contradiction. Every intelligence model produced mutually exclusive outcomes that could not be reconciled into a single actionable truth. And that uncertainty was becoming contagious. Across Council armadas, ships began reporting a disturbing phenomenon. Their own internal systems were no longer fully aligned. Tactical AIs that had once operated with flawless coherence began generating divergent conclusions within the same vessel. 2 different outcomes for the same action. 3, sometimes more. Not malfunction, disagreement. Reality, as interpreted by machines of war, was no longer consistent with itself. Inside the command vault, Eris finally spoke. "We stop asking what Earth is," he said quietly, voice carrying across every remnant channel. A pause. Then he stepped closer to the holographic core, where fractured representations of Council fleets still circled human space like hesitant predators. "We start deciding what it will accept." The phrase did not trigger alarms. It triggered recognition, because something in the human network had already begun doing exactly that. Hidden across old communication relays, dormant defense arrays, and abandoned deep space probes, humanity's adaptive intelligence systems had quietly stopped reacting to the galaxy and started responding to it. Not with aggression, not with defense in the traditional sense, but with definition. Every time the Council attempted to classify Earth as removed, human systems introduced counterstructures that made removal logically incomplete. Every time a fleet attempted isolation, new pathways emerged that reconnected causality around them. Every attempt to finalize Earth's status resulted in branching outcomes that invalidated the original premise. Humanity was not fighting the galaxy. It was denying it a stable interpretation of victory, and now that denial was becoming active, far beyond the moon, Council fleets began to feel it in their targeting systems, subtle at first. A delay between intent and execution, a hesitation in trajectory confirmation, then escalation, firing solutions that required consensus across systems that could no longer agree with themselves. A Threx warship captain shouted orders that no longer synchronized across his own bridge. A Veil command node attempted recalibration and returned only recursive uncertainty. Entire fleets began to drift, not from damage but from loss of unified operational truth. And still Earth remained untouched, not because it was protected, but because every attempt to define the act of striking it resulted in contradiction before action could complete. Eris closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, his voice was no longer just command. It was alignment. "Let them realize it," he said softly. Outside, the galaxy's most powerful armadas were beginning to understand a terrifying shift. War no longer failed because it was resisted. It failed because Earth no longer fit cleanly inside the idea of being destroyed. The ending did not arrive like victory. It arrived like a system finally admitting it could not continue the argument. Across the shattered edges of Council-controlled space, fleets that had once moved with unified intent now drifted in fractured silence. Weapon systems still glowed with readiness, targeting matrices still locked onto Earth's coordinates. But none of them could agree on what locking on actually meant anymore. Every calculation ended in contradiction. Every firing solution dissolved into competing outcomes that refused to stabilize. And then, one by one, they stopped trying. Not because they were defeated in the traditional sense, but because continuation itself had become logically expensive. Inside the Threx flagship, the warlord stood alone on the command bridge, surrounded by officers who no longer spoke in certainty but in revisions, constant corrections to orders that no longer held the same meaning twice. The galaxy's greatest war machine had not been broken. It had been desynchronized from reality. "Report," the warlord demanded. There was a pause long enough for entire civilizations to feel it. Then the tactical AI responded, its voice stripped of aggression, stripped of identity, reduced to something almost human in its confusion. "Engagement outcome non-resolvable." The phrase spread across fleets instantly. Non-resolvable, not victory, not defeat, not stalemate, just a condition where outcome could not be computed. Far away, in human space, Admiral Eris Vale watched it unfold through layered streams of collapsed enemy coordination. The remnant fleet stood ready for retaliation, for escalation, for the final wave of destruction that every historical model had predicted would follow resistance. But it never came, because the galaxy had reached a conclusion it did not know how to declare, that Earth was not protected by force, and not defeated by force either. It was operating outside the frame where force could finalize meaning. On the holographic displays, Council fleets began withdrawing, not as a strategic retreat but as a gradual loss of operational coherence. Some ships simply powered down weapons and drifted into inert orbit. Others rerouted themselves away from human space without command authorization, as if distance itself was becoming the only stable decision left. No treaties were signed. No surrender was declared, because neither concept applied anymore. A junior analyst in the lunar command vault, whispered the realization as it formed across every system simultaneously. "They can't finish the war," she said. Aris did not look away from the collapsing maps of alien formations. "No," he replied quietly, a pause. "Because they can't agree on what finishing it even looks like." Outside, the galaxy did not burn. It recalibrated, slowly, uneasily, as if trying to recover from an equation that had stopped producing single answers. Council archives attempted to restore historical continuity. Fleet logs attempted to reconcile contradictory engagement data. Entire intelligence networks ran recursive audits of their own memory structures, and all of them returned the same final instability. Earth remained inconsistent, unfinalized, uncontainable within a single definition of outcome. In the silence that followed, something unprecedented spread through the stars. Not fear, not peace, but understanding without consensus. Every civilization that had come to erase humanity left with the same impossible realization. You cannot destroy what refuses to settle into a single version of reality. Back on Earth, oceans still moved. Cities still glowed. Life continued as if nothing in the galaxy had changed. But in orbit, where fleets once gathered to end a species, there was only hesitation now. And in that hesitation, humanity did not roar, did not conquer, did not chase. It simply remained. And that, more than any weapon ever forged, was what finally ended the conversation forever.